January 15th, 1978, 3:23 a.m. Nita Neary pushed open the door of the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee, returning from a date. The front door was ajar, not unusual for a Saturday night, but something felt wrong. The air held a quality she would later struggle to describe to detectives, a thickness, a sense of recent violence hanging like humidity. She stepped inside quietly, not wanting to wake her sorority sisters. Then she saw him, a man in a dark jacket and knit cap, crouched at the top of the staircase, clutching something in his hand. Their eyes met for less than 2 seconds. He bolted down the stairs past her and out the door, moving with the coiled efficiency of someone who had done this before. Neary stood frozen, her mind trying to process what she'd witnessed. Then she heard it. A wet, gurgling sound from upstairs. A moan that barely qualified as human. She ran to the nearest bedroom and threw open the door. Karen Chandler was sitting up in bed, her face a mask of blood, her skull visibly fractured. In the next room, Kathy Kleiner lay unconscious, her jaw shattered, teeth scattered across the pillow. Down the hall, Margaret Bowman was already dead, strangled with her own pantyhose, her skull crushed with such force that investigators would later find the impression of the murder weapon in her bone. But it was the last room that would seal a killer's fate. 21-year-old Lisa Levy lay on her blood-soaked mattress, sexually assaulted, beaten, strangled with a ligature. And on her left buttock, in her own tissue and blood, was something investigators had never seen in a serial murder case: a perfect, detailed bite mark. By sunrise, the Chi Omega house was a crime scene. By sunset, detectives knew they were hunting someone who had killed before. What they didn't know was that the man who left that bite mark had already murdered at least 30 women across 5 states, had escaped from custody twice, and was about to make the fatal mistake that would finally end the most notorious killing spree in American history. The question wasn't who he was. The question was how long it had taken to stop him. Theodore Robert Bundy was born November 24, 1946, to Eleanor Louise Cowell at a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His biological father's identity remains disputed. Eleanor claimed he was a sailor named Lloyd Marshall, though some researchers believe he may have been her own father, making Ted the product of incest. For the first 3 years of his life, Ted was raised by his grandparents in Philadelphia, told that his mother was his sister, living in a household where his grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was known for violent rages, pornography collection, and possible abuse of animals. When Eleanor moved to Tacoma, Washington, and married Johnny Bundy in 1951, young Ted struggled to connect with his stepfather. Intelligent but socially awkward, he developed what psychologists would later identify as a profound sense of fraudulence. He felt he was playing a role, wearing a mask of normalcy, while something fundamentally broken festered inside. Classmates remembered him as handsome but odd, present but somehow absent. He had no close friends. He didn't date. Instead, he developed an obsession with true crime magazines and detective magazines featuring bound women in distress. His first confirmed stalking behavior began in his teens. He would follow young women, peering into their windows at night, learning their routines. He later described experiencing a euphoria during these sessions that nothing else in his life provided. Not academic achievement, not relationships, not success. Only the hunt. Only the power. By his early 20s, he'd developed a sophisticated understanding of how to present himself: clean-cut, charming, educated. He volunteered at a suicide hotline. He attended the University of Washington, majoring in psychology with excellent grades. He worked on political campaigns. Everyone who knew Ted Bundy in public settings described him as helpful, articulate, destined for greatness. No one saw the other Ted, the one who had begun assembling a rape and murder kit in his Volkswagen Beetle, a crowbar, handcuffs, rope, an ice pick, and a ski mask. The one who had perfected a technique of feigning injury, a fake cast on his arm, to lure compassionate young women into helping him carry books or load sailboats into his car. The one who had decided that controlling women completely, reducing them to objects for his use, was the only thing that made him feel real. His victim type crystallized early. Young women with long, dark hair parted in the middle, college-aged, slim, attractive. Psychologists would later note the resemblance to his first serious girlfriend, Stephanie Brooks, a wealthy California woman who had broken up with him in 1968, telling him he had no direction in life. That rejection shattered whatever fragile normalcy Bundy had constructed. When he reconnected with her years later, appearing successful and confident, she fell for him again. He courted her carefully, then abruptly dumped her without explanation. When she later asked why, he told her, "I just wanted to prove to myself that I could have married you." It was a statement that revealed his entire psychology. Relationships as conquest, women as objects to dominate and discard. But dumping a girlfriend wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Linda Ann Healy disappeared from her basement bedroom in Seattle on February 1st, 1974. Her bed was found with the pillows carefully arranged, a nightgown laid out, bloodstains on the sheets. She was 21, a psychology major, with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Her body would not be found for over a year. Between March and July 1974, 6 more young women vanished from Washington and Oregon, all matching the same physical profile. Witnesses at Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14th reported a handsome young man with his arm in a sling, calling himself Ted, asking women to help him load a sailboat onto his car. 2 women, Janice Ott and Denise Neslund, agreed to help. Both disappeared. Their remains were found months later in the Cascade foothills. The Lake Sammamish abductions marked a shift in Bundy's behavior. He was growing bolder, taking 2 victims in one day from a crowded public park. He was accelerating. His cooling-off periods between kills were shortening. The psychological pressure of his fantasies demanded more frequent release. By the time he moved to Utah to attend law school in fall 1974, he had likely killed at least 8 women in the Pacific Northwest, though the exact number remains unknown. He left no usable forensic evidence. He disposed of bodies in remote mountainous areas where animals would destroy DNA evidence. He was, by FBI classification, a highly organized killer, intelligent, methodical, socially competent, and utterly without conscience. In Utah and Colorado, the pattern continued. Melissa Smith, 17, daughter of the Midvale police chief, disappeared October 18, 1974. Her body was found 9 days later, sexually assaulted and strangled. Laura Amy, 17, vanished on Halloween night, 1974, from Lehi, Utah. Carol DeRanch, 18, was approached by a man claiming to be a police officer in a Murray, Utah shopping mall on November 8, 1974. He tried to handcuff her and force her into his Volkswagen Beetle. She fought back and escaped, the first victim to survive an encounter with Ted Bundy and live to identify him. DeRanch's description of her attacker and his vehicle led to Bundy's first arrest on August 16, 1975, when a Utah Highway Patrol officer pulled him over for a routine traffic stop and found handcuffs, a crowbar, a ski mask, and other burglary tools in his car. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping in the DeRanch case. During the investigation, detectives connected him to missing women across multiple states. Hair samples found in his car microscopically matched victims. His credit card receipts placed him near abduction sites. His law school classmates reported he had been absent on several dates when women disappeared. But Bundy was brilliant at manipulation. He maintained his innocence with such conviction that even seasoned investigators questioned their case. He was convicted in the Durant kidnapping in 1976 and sentenced to 15 years, but he continued to deny any involvement in murders. Then Colorado authorities charged him with the murder of Karen Campbell, who had vanished from a ski resort in January 1975. Her skull, fractured by repeated blows, had been found in the mountains. Bundy was extradited to Colorado to stand trial. He never made it to that trial. On June 7, 1977, during a pre-trial hearing in Pitkin County Courthouse, Bundy asked to visit the law library. His guards, accustomed to his polite demeanor, gave him minimal supervision. He jumped from a second-story window and escaped into the mountains. He was captured 6 days later, starving and frostbitten. 6 months after that, on December 30, 1977, he escaped again, this time sawing through a light fixture in his cell ceiling, crawling through the ductwork, and dropping into a jailer's apartment. He stole civilian clothes and walked out the front door. By the time guards discovered he was missing, Ted Bundy had a 15-hour head start. He ran east. He knew every law enforcement agency in the western United States was hunting him. He needed to disappear completely, start fresh somewhere he'd never operated before. He stole cars, used stolen credit cards, and on January 8, 1978, arrived in Tallahassee, Florida. He rented a room near Florida State University under the name Chris Hagen. He had no job, no plan, no purpose, except the one that had always driven him. Within a week of arriving in Florida, the psychological pressure was building again. The fantasies demanded expression. He tried to control them. He couldn't. He never could. On January 14, 1978, Bundy spent the evening drinking at a college bar, watching young women dance. Surveillance cameras later showed him leaving alone around 2 a.m. He walked through the dark streets surrounding FSU campus, his mind narrowing to a single focus. At 2:45 a.m., he entered the Chi Omega sorority house through a door left unlocked by a resident. He moved through the building with a piece of firewood he'd found outside, a weapon of opportunity, heavy enough to crush bone. He entered Margaret Bowman's room first. She never woke up. He strangled her with her own pantyhose, then beat her skull with such force that the wood splintered. In Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler's room, both women were asleep when he began striking them. The sounds of the assault woke them. Chandler's screams may have saved both their lives. Bundy fled before finishing what he'd started. In Lisa Levy's room, he had more time. He sexually assaulted her with a bottle. He strangled her. He beat her. And then, in a frenzy of violence that even he later struggled to explain, he bit deeply into her buttock and her left nipple, leaving detailed impressions of his teeth in her flesh. The entire attack lasted less than 15 minutes. By the time Nita Neary encountered him fleeing down the stairs, he had killed 2 women and brutally assaulted 2 others. He walked 8 blocks east and broke into another apartment, attacking 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas with a metal rod. She survived with permanent hearing loss and a fractured skull. All of this carnage in under an hour. It was disorganized, frenzied, utterly unlike his previous crimes. Psychologists would later theorize that his escapes, his time on the run, the stress of being the most wanted fugitive in America, had shattered his usual control. He was devolving. The mask was slipping. Bundy left Florida immediately after the Chi Omega murders, stealing cars and heading west. But he couldn't help himself. On February 9, 1978, in Lake City, Florida, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school playground. He raped and murdered her, dumping her body in an abandoned pig barn. She was his youngest victim, a deviation from his pattern that suggested complete psychological deterioration. 3 days later, a Pensacola police officer ran the license plates on a stolen Volkswagen and pulled the driver over. The man gave his name as Kenneth Misner and tried to run. After a violent struggle, he was subdued and arrested. In the Pensacola jail, the man who called himself Kenneth Misner finally admitted his real identity. Ted Bundy was back in custody, this time in a state with an active death penalty. Florida authorities charged him with the Chi Omega murders and the killing of Kimberly Leach. The trials would become media spectacles, some of the first to be nationally televised. Bundy represented himself, cross-examining witnesses, presenting arguments, performing for the cameras. He was charming, articulate, seemingly confident. Spectators filled the courtroom. Some women sent him love letters. He proposed to and married Carol Ann Boone during his murder trial, using an obscure Florida law that recognized declarations of marriage in court as legally binding. But the state of Florida had physical evidence that Bundy's charm couldn't overcome. The bite marks on Lisa Levy's body had been photographed and measured by forensic odontologists. On the prosecution's witness list was Dr. Richard Souviron, a pioneering forensic dentist who had been analyzing bite mark evidence since the early 1970s. When investigators learned that Bundy had left bite marks on his victim, they obtained a warrant to make dental impressions of his teeth. Bundy resisted, understanding immediately that this evidence could destroy him. He was forced to comply. Dr. Souviron's testimony at trial was devastating. He showed the jury enlarged photographs of the bite marks on Lisa Levy's buttock, then overlaid a transparent sheet showing the exact alignment with Bundy's dental impressions. The match was undeniable. Bundy's teeth were unique, chipped, uneven, with distinctive gaps and alignment patterns. The upper and lower teeth impressions matched the wounds on Levy's body perfectly. Souviron explained that bite mark analysis examines specific individual characteristics: the size and shape of each tooth, the distance between teeth, unique chips or rotations, the depth and pattern of the bite force. Bundy's teeth displayed at least 8 unique characteristics that matched the marks on the victim. The jury saw photographs of those teeth marks superimposed over Bundy's dental impressions, a perfect alignment that seemed impossible to dispute. The defense argued that bite mark analysis wasn't reliable science, that the matches were subjective, that any number of people might have similar dental patterns. But Dr. Souviron's testimony was backed by physical evidence, measurements, and photographic documentation. More importantly, Nita Neary identified Bundy as the man she'd seen fleeing the sorority house. Hair evidence, while not DNA quality, was microscopically consistent with Bundy's hair. His stolen credit cards placed him in Tallahassee at the time of the murders. On July 24, 1979, after less than 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Theodore Robert Bundy guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and the attempted murders of Karen Chandler, Kathy Kleiner, and Cheryl Thomas. Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death by electrocution, but not before delivering a remarkable statement from the bench. "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner." Bundy was also convicted in the murder of Kimberly Leach in 1980 and sentenced to death again. He spent the next 9 years on Florida's death row at Rayford Prison, filing appeals, granting interviews, and offering to provide information about unsolved murders in exchange for stays of execution. He eventually confessed to 30 murders, though investigators believe the real number may exceed 50. He described his crimes in third person, as if discussing someone else's actions, never fully accepting responsibility. He blamed pornography for corrupting him, a claim that psychologists viewed as deflection. He had been stalking and fantasizing about killing women since adolescence, long before he had access to hardcore pornography. In his final interviews before execution, Bundy attempted to explain his psychology to investigators and journalists. He described entering a dissociative state before and during his attacks, what he called the entity, a separate part of himself that took control. He discussed his victims as objects, possessions to be acquired and used. He admitted to returning to body disposal sites to have sex with decomposing corpses, demonstrating the absolute necrophilic core of his pathology. He showed no genuine remorse. Even his confessions were calculated, trading information for more time, maintaining control until the very end. January 24th, 1989, 7:16 m. Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair at Florida State Prison. Hundreds of people gathered outside to celebrate, holding signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and "Tuesday is Friday." His last words were to his attorney, "Jim, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." When the switch was thrown, 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body. He was pronounced dead at 7:16 a.m. He was 42 years old. The bite marks that sent him to the electric chair represented a turning point in American forensic science. The Bundy trial established bite mark analysis as admissible evidence in criminal proceedings, though the science has since come under significant scrutiny. Modern DNA analysis has exonerated several people convicted partly on bite mark evidence, and the National Academy of Sciences has questioned whether bite mark analysis meets scientific reliability standards. But in 1979, those marks on Lisa Livy's body, captured in detailed photographs, measured and matched to Bundy's unique dental pattern, were the physical link that connected him irrefutably to her murder. For the families of Bundy's victims, there was no celebration at his execution, only exhausted relief. Margaret Bowman's mother said she felt nothing when he died, that he'd taken too much from too many people to deserve any emotional response. The parents of Kimberly Leach, who had watched their 12-year-old daughter vanish from her school playground, attended the execution. Chi Omega survivors. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner rebuilt their lives, but carried permanent scars, physical and psychological, from that January night. Cheryl Thomas, who survived the attack at her apartment, suffered lasting disabilities and spent years in therapy processing what happened to her. Bundy's case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches serial murder investigations. His ability to hunt across state lines exposed the critical need for better communication between jurisdictions. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, led by Robert Ressler and John Douglas, used Bundy as a primary case study in developing criminal profiling techniques. His organized killer profile, intelligent, socially competent, mobile, methodical, became a template for identifying other serial offenders. His tactics of using charm and feigned injury to lure victims led to widespread education about stranger danger and trusting instincts when something feels wrong. The question that haunted investigators then, and haunts criminologists now, is, could he have been stopped earlier? The warning signs were there. The stalking in his teens, the theft of his girlfriend's belongings, which he kept as trophies, his sudden, unexplained absences during periods when women disappeared. Witnesses in multiple states describing a man who called himself Ted, drove a Volkswagen Beetle, wore a cast on his arm. Carol Duranche's description of her attacker in 1974 closely matched Bundy, but he wasn't seriously investigated until 1975. How many lives could have been saved if detectives had connected the pattern earlier? Bundy himself, in his final interviews, claimed he could identify potential serial killers and that society should monitor young men who display certain warning signs. But he was lying even then, trying to position himself as an expert rather than an aberration. The truth is that most people who experience childhood trauma, who consume pornography, who struggle with social relationships, never become serial killers. Bundy chose his path. He chose it repeatedly, methodically, over years. He made conscious decisions to stalk, abduct, rape, murder, and dispose of young women whose only mistake was being vulnerable at the wrong moment. His legacy is not one of dark fascination or criminal genius. It's a legacy of shattered families, of young women who never got to finish their degrees or start careers or have children of their own. It's Margaret Bowman, 21, an art student who loved painting. It's Lisa Levy, 20, a fashion merchandising major planning to work in retail management. It's Kimberly Leach, 12, who was worried about a school project when she was abducted. It's at least 30 other women whose names we know, and dozens more who may have died at his hands, but were never found, never identified, never brought home to their families. The bite marks that sent Ted Bundy to the electric chair were not just forensic evidence. They were proof of his final loss of control, the moment when his carefully constructed facade completely crumbled and revealed the rage and sadism underneath. They were the mistake that comes eventually for every serial killer, no matter how intelligent or careful. They were justice, incomplete and imperfect, but justice nonetheless. And they remain a reminder that evil, no matter how charming its mask, always leaves evidence. Sometimes it's DNA. Sometimes it's a witness. Sometimes it's teeth marks in a victim's flesh, captured in photographs, measured in millimeters, matched beyond doubt. Theodore Robert Bundy believed he was smarter than everyone else. He believed he could kill indefinitely without consequences. He was wrong. In the end, his own teeth, his own body, betrayed him. The man who turned women into objects became an object himself, evidence. And the young women he murdered, whose names and faces he tried to erase, are remembered not as his victims, but as individuals, as daughters and students and friends whose lives mattered far more than his death ever will.